Now we're going to tie a pheasant tail. This is a great little mayfly nymph imitation that's really simple to tie, uses some very commonly available materials. It's one of my favorite flies to tie because it's really quick and cheap to tie, doesn't require anything real specific. The hook is a Tiemco 100 SPBL, and I like this hook because it's a little bit stouter, but it's still a standard configuration. It's not extra long or extra short. It's just a standard shank hook, but a little bit stouter wire, so I can fish it down on the bottom or to some bigger fish and not worry about it bending out. The tail, body, wing case, and legs of this fly are going to be made out of ringneck pheasant tail fibers. The thorax is going to be made out of peacock herl, and I'm going to use the peacock herl from the eye of the quill, so I've got a little bit thinner, more proportionally sized peacock herl for the fly. And the rib is going to be just fine copper wire. This is about a 38 gauge copper wire for a size 18. The thread that I'll use is Unithread A-Dot Rusty Brown, and you can use a traditional brown as well. I like this rusty brown. It kind of blends in with the color of the pheasant tail feather and adds a little shot of color to a pretty drab fly. So to start, what I'll do is I'm going to start the thread just in front of the halfway point on the hook, and I'm going to wrap back all the way to the bend. When I get to the bend, this is where I'm going to tie in the tail. Now, I tie a pheasant tail, particularly in small sizes, a little differently than most other tiers. I'm going to select out 4 strands of pheasant tail fiber here. And like the tail on the hare's ear, I'm going to pull these out at a right angle to the stem so that the tips become even. And I'm going to tie the whole fly with these same 4 strands. This is going to make the fly really thin, much more realistic, and far less steps than the conventional method of using a different clump for the tail, thorax, abdomen, and so forth. So, I'm going to take these 4 fibers, square them up, I'll peel them off the feather, and I'm going to measure this clump against the hook shank, so it's about a half a shank long. I'll transfer this to my material hand, and I'm going to tie this in at the bend with just a single turn of thread right on top of the hook bend. Now before I go on, I'm going to take my wire and I'm going to tie it in here as well. This fly is a good exercise in being efficient and not overlapping your wraps anywhere. So I've got my thread back here at the bend. I'm going to lay this wire in at the bend of the hook and catch it with one more turn right over that first turn. Now you can see the stub end of my wire comes up to about the 60% point on the hook. That's going to help form our underbody. I'm going to lift the remaining pheasant tail fibers up out of the way here, and I'm going to continue forward wrapping over the wire up to that 60 or 70% point. Now this is a size 18. On a smaller fly, I won't bother to build an underbody, but on this size fly, I do like to build a slight thread underbody just to give a little more taper to the front end of the fly. So I'll just overlap a couple times on the front end to thicken that abdomen up just slightly. Now I'm going to wrap all 4 of these fibers forward over that thread underbody. And when I do this, I want these fibers to lay 4 across. I don't want them twisted or bundled. I want them to try to lay as flat as I can, like a ribbon, as I come forward. It shouldn't take very many turns if they lay out flat. I'll wrap those to the end of the thread body, tie those off with a couple turns of thread, and I have not clipped them yet. I won't clip these fibers until after I've whip finished the fly, so just keep that in mind as you tie. Now we're going to wrap our rib. Now the first thing that I do with this rib is I'm going to take this first turn of wire underneath the hook, and you can see that'll slightly elevate the tail of the fly a bit. The second turn is going to be right at the base of the tail, and that's going to cover those first 2 turns of thread that we tied both the wire and the pheasant tail down with. From here, I'm going to make pretty tight wraps coming forward through the pheasant tail with my wire ribbing, and this will reinforce that pheasant tail. Pheasant tail is not a terribly durable material, but it's really a good fish catcher. So I'm just going to try to reinforce that as much as I can with several wraps of wire. I'll tie that wire off, and again with this fine wire I can just break it off. Now I've got my 4 strands of pheasant tail sticking forward here. Those are going to become our wing case. I'm going to fold these back on top of the fly, and I'm going to wrap back over them, just slightly overlapping the front edge of the abdomen. So much like we did the hare's ear, we're going to overlap that wing case. It was just already attached to the hook. Now I'm going to grab a little bundle, 6 or 8 fine peacock curls. I'm going to group these all together in a nice little bundle. I'm going to trim the tips square. I'll bring my thread forward to just behind the index point and tie these in. I'll pull them down to length, and I'll wrap back over these right up to the base of the wing case. Now I'm going to bring my thread forward again, and notice that I've still got about an eye length worth of bare space behind the hook eye. We're going to need that in a minute. These legs are going to come in very similarly to the wing buds on the jujube that we did earlier. Now I'm going to wrap all of these peacock curls together, and the reason I used a bundle of them, I've got 6 or 8 here on this little fly, is I don't need to make very many turns. I'm only going to make 2 or 3 turns to build the thorax. You can see how nice and smoothly that's covered with just 3 turns of peacock curl. I'll come up and tie that off, and you can see that hurl is a lot more proportioned to the hook than the larger sized hurl at the base of the eye. Now I'm going to use my fine tip scissors to come in and trim this as close as I can. I'm going to make just a few turns to anchor everything down there at the front. I'm going to pull my wing case forward with my thread hand and tie it off with a couple turns just up here behind the eye. So we've got our wing case pulled right over the top of the thorax, and we've got our stub end still sticking out the front of the fly. Now at this point we've got these little hooks left on the end of the pheasant tail fibers. I'll usually come in and trim those off, and I'm going to pick out just 1 fiber on each side for the legs. Some tyers will use 2, but in an effort to keep this fly really thin and slender, I'm going to just use 1. It keeps the fly obviously half as much bulk. So I'm going to pull 1 leg back on my near side, and I'll catch it with a turn of thread. And again, I want to keep that right in line with the hook shank. I'm going to pull 1 leg back on the far side and catch it with a turn of thread. And you can see I'm just using 1 turn at a time. That's all it takes. Don't do 5 turns on each one of those. You'll end up with way more bulk than you need. I've got both those legs in line with the hook shank. I'm going to take 1 more turn up close to the hook eye. I'm going to draw my thread tight, and these remaining 2 stubs I'm just going to pop to break off. I'm going to build a smooth thread head over the stub ends of the legs in the wing case. I'm going to trim that thread down, and now I'm going to cut the legs just beyond the back edge of the wing case. So we've got a nice slender little mayfly nymph that you can tie in a variety of different colors. Pheasant tails come in olive, black, red, orange, purple, all sorts of different colors. The fly's tied exactly the same. You might vary your thread color up a little bit, but keep the constant of the peacock curl and the copper wire, and you'll have a good little mayfly nymph to use anywhere in the country.